My mother looked me in the eye at my 63rd birthday dinner and said, "You're the most useless child we have." The entire restaurant went silent. My brother Varric smirked. My sister Arya looked away. Finian, the golden child, pretended not to hear. For 63 years, I believed her. I was the son who became a teacher instead of a lawyer, the one who lived modestly while my siblings built empires, the invisible one, the failure. But that night, I stood up and finished her sentence. What I said next made my mother's face go pale, not with anger, but with fear, because 2 years ago I found something in my dead father's belongings, a box she thought was burned, a ledger she thought was gone forever, and what was inside didn't just explain why I was treated like nothing. It revealed decades of lies, fraud, and a family conspiracy that would destroy everything they'd built. My mother thought she was humiliating me one last time. She had no idea I'd been planning this moment for 730 days. What happened next forced my entire family to confront a truth they'd buried for decades. And the revenge I took? It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was something far worse. If you want to know what I said that made my mother realize she'd lost, if you want to see how a useless son brought down an empire with a single USB drive and a lawyer named Leora, then you need to subscribe right now. Hit that bell icon so you don't miss a single chapter. Like this video if you've ever been told you weren't good enough. And comment below, have you ever gotten revenge on someone who underestimated you? The story is just beginning. And trust me, the truth is darker than you think. Subscribe now. Let's expose them together. I never thought I'd spend my 63rd birthday planning revenge. But there I was, sitting at the head of a table at Giovanni's, an upscale Italian restaurant my mother chose because she said it had standards, surrounded by my family, wearing a forced smile, waiting for the exact right moment. My mother, Evelyn, sat to my right, her pearl necklace catching the candlelight. Across from me was Varric, my older brother, already on his 3rd glass of wine, his Rolex glinting as he checked his phone. Beside him sat Arya, my sister, her designer dress probably worth more than my monthly salary, laughing at something her husband whispered. And then there was Finian, the golden child, the heir, sitting beside our mother like a prince at court, smiling that perfect smile that had gotten him everything in life. They had no idea what was coming. The waiter brought out my cake, some expensive tiramisu creation I didn't ask for. Everyone sang half-heartedly. I blew out the candles. "Make a wish, Riven," my mother said, her voice dripping with that familiar condescension. I already did, I thought, 730 days ago. Finian raised his glass. "To Riven, the teacher of the family." He laughed. Others joined in, uncomfortable. Varric snorted. "Yeah, to the guy who chose chalk dust over real money." I smiled, said nothing. I'd learned a long time ago that silence was safer than honesty in this family. Then my mother cleared her throat. "Since we're all here," she began, her voice cutting through the laughter like a blade, "I think it's appropriate to acknowledge something." My stomach tightened. I knew that tone. "Riven, you're 63 years old now, and I think it's time someone said what we've all been thinking for years." Arya shifted uncomfortably. Finian looked down at his plate. My mother leaned forward, her eyes cold. "You're the most useless child we have." The restaurant went silent. Not just our table, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. I felt heat rise to my face. Shame. Anger. That old familiar cocktail I'd been drinking my entire life. Varric smirked into his wine. Arya looked away, her face flushed. Finian said nothing, just stared at the tablecloth like it held the answers to the universe. And that's when something inside me snapped. Not into pieces, into place. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. My mother's eyes widened slightly, surprised maybe that I wasn't shrinking away like I always had. "You're right, Mother," I said, my voice steady. I am useless. I could see Varek's smirk widen, Arya's discomfort deepen. I'm useless, because you spent 63 years making sure I believed I was nothing. My mother's face changed. Just a flicker, a flash of something that looked almost like fear. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a single photograph. I placed it on the table in front of her. It was old, faded, a picture of my father, young, smiling, standing in front of a chalkboard, surrounded by immigrant students in a night school classroom. Dad was a teacher once, I said quietly. Before you made him give it up, before you convinced him that success was the only thing that mattered. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for the photograph. 2 years ago, when Dad died, you gave me a box. You said it was junk, old journals, sentimental garbage. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. But at the bottom of that box was a ledger, handwritten, detailed, 30 years of financial transactions, bribes, shell companies, tax fraud, every lie you ever told, every corner you ever cut, every law you ever broke. Her face went white. And you know what the best part is, Mother? I smiled. Finian, Varek, and Arya all knew. They all benefited, and I have proof. I stepped back from the table, buttoned my jacket, and looked around at my family. My brother's shock, my sister's horror, Finian's frozen panic. So, yes, I'm the most useless child you have. But at least I'm not a criminal. I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice shaking. Riven, wait. But I didn't stop, because I'd been waiting 63 years to finish that sentence. And I was just getting started. Wait, you think that's the revenge? Oh no, that was just the setup. Next, you'll find out what Riven really did with that ledger. And trust me, it's brutal. If you're not subscribed yet, you're about to miss the moment a federal lawyer named Leora walks into the family Thanksgiving dinner with handcuffs and a search warrant. Subscribe now. Hit that notification bell, like if you've ever wanted to stand up to someone who broke you. And comment. What would you do with that ledger? Don't miss it. Let me tell you how I became invisible. When I was 8 years old, my father sat all of us down in his office, a massive room with mahogany shelves and the smell of leather and old money, and he told us something I'd never forget. In this family, he said, his voice deep and firm, success is the only currency that matters. Varek was 11. He puffed out his chest, already imagining himself as a lawyer, a titan, a winner. Arya was 6, already learning that beauty and marriage were her tickets to that success. Finian was barely 4, sitting on our mother's lap, her hand stroking his hair like he was made of gold. And me? I was somewhere in the middle. Not the oldest, not the youngest, not the prettiest or the smartest. Just there. By the time I was 15, the roles were set. Varek got into Yale. Arya was dating a senator's son. Finian was already being groomed to take over the family real estate business. And I told my parents I wanted to be a teacher. I'll never forget my mother's face. She laughed, not a polite chuckle, a real, cruel laugh. Teaching, she said. Riven, teaching is what people do when they fail at everything else. My father said nothing. He just looked at me with this disappointment. Like I'd already let him down. So I buried it. I went to business school to please them. I tried to work in the family company for 2 miserable years. I even dated women they approved of. Women who looked at me like I was a project to fix. But I couldn't shake it. At 25, I quit the company and enrolled in a teaching credential program. My mother didn't speak to me for a year. My father called it a phase. When I got my first teaching job at a public middle school in a rough neighborhood, Varek sent me a card that said, "Congratulations on your early retirement from ambition." I married Mireya when I was 30. She was kind, funny, loved that I taught kids who needed someone to believe in them. For a while, I thought maybe I'd found my place, but my family never let me forget what I'd chosen. At every holiday, every family dinner, every wedding or funeral, there were the comments, "Still teaching, Riven? Must be nice not having any real pressure." We worry about you, you know, living like that. When Varric bought his penthouse, my parents threw him a party. When Arya married her hedge fund manager, they rented out a vineyard. When Finian took over the company at 28, my father gave him the keys to a summer house in Cape Cod. When I asked my parents for help with student loans, just $5,000, they said, "You made your choices." And I believed them. I believed I was less than. When my father died 2 years ago, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd leave me something that acknowledged I mattered. A letter. A word of pride. The will was read in Varric's law office. Leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows. Everyone dressed like they were attending a business merger, not a funeral. Varric got 3 properties in downtown Boston. Arya got stock portfolios. Finian got controlling interest in the company and Dad's vintage car collection. And me? The lawyer slid a single cardboard box across the table. "What's this?" I asked. "Your father's personal effects. He specifically requested you receive them." Varric laughed. "Looks like you got the junk drawer, little brother." I carried that box home in silence. Mireia had already left me by then. 10 years of watching my family tear me down had worn her out. I didn't blame her. I opened the box alone in my small living room. Inside were old teaching journals, photographs, letters my father had written but never sent. And that's when I saw it. My father, young, smiling, standing in front of a chalkboard, teaching a night class to immigrant workers. I'd never known. He'd never told me. I flipped through the journals. Page after page of lesson plans, student names, reflections on why teaching mattered. And then, dated 40 years ago, one entry. "Today, I gave up teaching to make my wife happy. I told myself it was practical. I told myself it was responsible. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of being seen as less than. I became what she wanted. And I hope, God, I hope, my son never makes the same mistake." He'd been talking about me. And at the very bottom of the box, hidden beneath the journals, wrapped in a plastic sleeve, was a leather-bound ledger. I opened it, and I saw 30 years of crimes. For 18 months I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. I went to work. I taught my students about the Revolutionary War and the water cycle and how to write a proper essay. I graded papers, I ate dinner alone, I lived my small, invisible life. But every night I studied that ledger. Shell companies in Delaware, fake invoices, properties bought under false names, tax shelters in the Cayman Islands. My mother had been running a criminal enterprise for 3 decades, and she'd used the family business as her cover. The worst part, she hadn't done it alone. There were initials next to transactions. V.R. Varric Reynolds, F.R. Finian Reynolds, A.M. Arya Morrison, her married name. They'd all known, they'd all profited. And when my father started asking questions 5 years before he died, I found those notes too, tucked in the margins. My mother had quietly pushed him out of his own company, made him think he was losing his mind, convinced him early retirement was for his health. She'd gaslit him into silence. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burn their world down. But I'm a teacher, and teachers know that the best lessons require patience. So I found Leora. Leora Chen was a financial crimes attorney who'd made a name for herself taking down white-collar criminals. She was sharp, relentless, and when I showed her the ledger, her eyes lit up like she'd just found buried treasure. "This is enough to freeze their assets and launch a federal investigation," she said. "But you need to understand, if you do this, there's no going back. Your family will hate you. Your name will be dragged through everything." I looked at her. "My family already hates me. They just do it quietly." She smiled. "Then let's make some noise." We spent 6 months building the case, matching ledger entries to bank records, finding witnesses, documenting everything. And then I did something crazy. I invited everyone to my house for Thanksgiving. I'd never hosted Thanksgiving before. My house was too small, too modest. Usually we gathered at Finian's estate or areas sprawling colonial. But this year, I insisted. I want to do something special, I told my mother over the phone. For family. She was suspicious. I could hear it in her voice. But she agreed. Maybe she thought I was finally trying to fit in. Maybe she just wanted to see my little house and feel superior one more time. They all came. Varric arrived late, complaining about traffic. Arya brought an expensive wine I knew she'd take home if it wasn't opened. Finian showed up with his perfect wife and perfect kids, all smiles and pressed clothes. My mother arrived last, her eyes scanning my small dining room like she was appraising it for an estate sale. "Cozy," she said. It wasn't a compliment. We sat down to dinner. I'd actually cooked. Turkey, stuffing, all of it. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Then the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," I said. I opened the door, and there stood Leora. Professional. Calm. Carrying a leather briefcase. Behind her were 2 federal agents. I turned back to the dining room. Every face was frozen, forks halfway to mouths. "Everyone, this is Leora Chen. She's a financial crimes attorney, and these are Special Agents Caldwell and Ruiz from the FBI. My mother stood up slowly, her napkin falling to the floor. "Riven, what is this?" Leora stepped forward. "Mrs. Reynolds, we're here to inform you that you are under investigation for wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. We have a warrant to seize financial records related to Reynolds' real estate holdings and several associated entities." Varric shot to his feet. "This is insane. You can't just—" "We can," Agent Caldwell said, holding up the warrant. "And we are." Finian's face had gone ghost white. Arya was shaking. My mother's eyes locked onto mine. And for the first time in my entire life, I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. "You," she whispered. "You did this." I walked to the head of the table, pulled out a folder and placed it in front of her. Inside was a copy of the ledger. Every page. Every crime. "Dad left this for me," I said quietly. "He wanted me to know the truth. About you. About all of you." Finian stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Riven, please. We can talk about this. Family should—" "Family?" I turned to him. "You mean the people who've spent 40 years telling me I'm worthless? The people who stole from our father and let him die thinking he was losing his mind?" Arya started crying. "We didn't know." "Yes, you did." I pulled out another sheet, a signed document. "This is an affidavit you signed 3 years ago, Arya. Acknowledging a transfer of $200,000 from a shell company into your personal account. You knew exactly where that money came from." Leora stepped forward. "We'll need all of you to come in for questioning. You're not under arrest, yet, but I strongly advise you to contact your attorneys." My mother's hands were shaking. She looked at me and her voice came out broken. "How could you do this to your own family?" I leaned down, close enough that only she could hear. "You did this. I just finished the sentence. I thought exposing them would feel like freedom. It didn't." The first week after Thanksgiving, I felt victorious. Agents were crawling through the family business. Assets were frozen. Varric hired a legal team. Finian stopped answering his phone. Arya's husband filed for separation. The house of cards was collapsing, and I was the one who'd pulled the thread. But my mother didn't collapse. She disappeared. For 3 weeks, no one knew where she was. Her lawyers said she was unavailable for comment. The agent said she'd probably fled to avoid seizure of personal assets. I should have known better. My mother never ran from a fight. She just changed the battlefield. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning. I was in my classroom teaching 8th graders about the Civil War when my phone buzzed. A text from my principal. "Please come to my office after 3rd period." I knew that tone. When I walked in, Principal Hawthorne was sitting behind his desk, his face grim. Beside him sat a woman I didn't recognize. Late 50s, suit, briefcase. "Riven, this is Margaret Cullens. She's from the district's HR and legal department." My stomach dropped. Margaret folded her hands. "Mr. Reynolds, we've received some concerning information. Allegations regarding your conduct during your divorce proceedings 20 years ago." "What?" She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printed emails, documents, screenshots of old financial records. "These documents suggest you hid assets during your divorce from Mireya Santos, that you transferred funds into accounts under false names to avoid equitable distribution." I stared at the pages. "This is insane. I didn't—" "There's also an allegation from a parent," Hawthorne interrupted, looking uncomfortable. "From 15 years ago, a complaint of inappropriate conduct. It was dismissed at the time, but it's resurfaced." My hands started shaking. That was a misunderstanding. A mother was angry because I failed her son for plagiarism. She made an accusation, it was investigated, and I was cleared. Margaret's face was neutral. "Nevertheless, given the current visibility of your family's legal situation and these allegations, we need to place you on administrative leave, effective immediately." "You're suspending me." "Not suspending. Leave, with pay, until we can conduct a full review." I felt the walls closing in. "Who sent you these documents?" Margaret hesitated. "They were sent anonymously, but they were also copied to several parents, the local newspaper, and the school board." "My mother. She wasn't running. She was burning me down." I drove home in a daze. When I pulled into my driveway, there was a car I didn't recognize parked on the street. A woman got out. Late 40s, sharp eyes, reporter's notebook. "Mr. Reynolds, Jennifer Callahan, Metro Daily. Can I ask you a few questions about the allegations that you—" I slammed my car door and walked into my house without a word. Inside, my phone was ringing. I ignored it. Then came the email. From Mireya, my ex-wife. Subject line: "We need to talk." My hand hovered over the delete button. Then I opened it. "Riven, your mother called me yesterday. She told me things about you. About our divorce. About why you really wanted to be a teacher. She said you've been lying to me for 20 years. That you hid money. That you manipulated me. I don't know what to believe anymore. I thought I knew you. Please tell me she's wrong." I read it 3 times. Then I threw my phone across the room. For the next 2 weeks, my life unraveled. Parents started pulling their kids from my classes, even though I wasn't even there. Neighbors stopped making eye contact. Someone spray-painted "liar" on my mailbox. And then Varick's legal team filed a countersuit. Defamation, conspiracy to defraud, emotional distress. They claimed I had fabricated evidence, manipulated documents, and launched a vendetta against my family out of jealousy and spite. The narrative was shifting. I wasn't the whistleblower anymore. I was the villain. Leora called me, her voice tight. "Riven, we need to talk. The federal case is still solid, but this countersuit, it's going to get ugly. They're going to drag your entire life through discovery. Every mistake, every bad decision, everything." I sat in my dark living room, staring at the wall. "Let them," I said. "Riven." I said let them. My voice was hollow. "I've spent 63 years being invisible. If they want to make me visible, fine. But I'm not backing down." There was a long silence. "There's one more thing," Leora said quietly. "We got a letter from someone who wants to meet with you. Anonymously. They claim to have evidence that could end this, but they'll only talk to you. Alone. Who? They didn't say. But Riven, they said they're family." I closed my eyes. Family. The word tasted like poison. The diner was 40 miles outside the city, tucked between a highway and a stretch of empty farmland. The kind of place where nobody asks questions and the coffee tastes like burnt regret. I arrived 15 minutes early, sitting in a corner booth with my back to the wall like some paranoid detective in a bad movie. My hands were shaking. I hadn't slept in 3 days. Leora had wanted to come with me, but the instructions were clear. Come alone or don't come at all. At exactly 2 p.m., the door opened, and my sister Arya walked in. I almost stood up and left. This had to be a setup, another one of my mother's games, but then I saw her face. She looked broken. Hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup. Dark circles under her eyes. She wore jeans and a plain sweater. Nothing designer, nothing expensive. She slid into the booth across from me, and I saw her hands were shaking too. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "Why are you here, Arya?" She didn't answer right away, just stared at her coffee cup like it held answers she was too afraid to find. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small black USB drive. She placed it on the table between us. "This is Mom's real ledger," she said quietly. "The original, the one she thought she destroyed 15 years ago. She kept a backup, hidden in a safety deposit box that only she and I had access to." I stared at the drive. "Why would you—" "Because she did the same thing to me." Arya's voice cracked. She looked up, and I saw tears streaming down her face. 23 years ago, I was engaged. His name was Daniel. He was a public school music teacher. I loved him, Riven. I loved him. I said nothing. I'd never heard this story. Mom hated him. Said he wasn't good enough. Said I'd be throwing my life away. I didn't care. I was going to marry him anyway. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. 2 weeks before the wedding, Daniel broke it off. Said he couldn't do it. That he realized we wanted different things. I was devastated. I thought it was my fault. Her hands clenched into fists. Last month I found a letter in Mom's safe deposit box, along with this USB drive. It was from Daniel, written to me, 23 years ago. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to me. I opened it. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. "Arya, I'm so sorry. Your mother came to see me. She offered me $50,000 to leave you. Said if I didn't, she'd destroy my career, get me fired, make sure I never taught again. I didn't want to believe her, but then I lost my job. The principal said there were complaints. Your mother called me the next day and told me she could make it all go away if I disappeared. I'm a coward. I took the money. I broke your heart. I'll never forgive myself. I loved you. I still do. But I'm not strong enough to fight her. I'm sorry." I looked up at Arya. She was sobbing now, silent and broken. "She ruined my life, Riven. She made me think I wasn't good enough for love. She forced me into a marriage with Marcus because he had money and connections. I spent 20 years in a loveless marriage, raising kids with a man who treated me like a business asset." She pointed at the USB drive. "That drive has everything. Every crime, every bribe, every person she's destroyed, including Dad." "Dad?" Arya nodded. 5 years before he died, he started asking questions about discrepancies in the business, about money that didn't add up. Mom didn't just push him out. She poisoned him, Riven. Not literally, but she convinced his doctors he was having early-stage dementia. She forged medical reports. She gaslit him so badly that he started believing it himself. I felt bile rise in my throat. She killed his mind, and then she erased him. Arya slid the USB drive toward me. "This ends her, completely. It has evidence of fraud going back 35 years. Emails, audio recordings, video. She documented everything because she thought she was untouchable." I picked up the drive, my hand trembling. "Why now? Why help me?" Arya's eyes met mine, and I saw something I'd never seen in her before. Rage. Because 2 weeks ago, I found out she's doing it again. To Finian's daughter. Your niece, Claire. She's 17. She wants to be an artist. Mom told her art school is for failures, that she needs to go to business school or she'll be disowned. Arya's voice turned to steel. I watched Mom destroy you. I watched her destroy me. I watched her destroy Dad. I won't let her destroy another generation. She stood up, grabbed her coat. Take that to Leora. Burn her to the ground. And Riven? I looked up. I'm sorry. For everything. For not standing up sooner. For being a coward. She walked toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. When you take her down, make sure she knows it was me who gave you this. And then she was gone. I sat there for 20 minutes, staring at the USB drive. Then I called Leora. I have everything, I said. Let's finish this. The courtroom was packed. Press, federal agents, lawyers. My mother sat at the defense table, her posture perfect, her face a mask of cold control. Varric sat behind her, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the panic in his eyes. Finian hadn't even shown up, but Arya sat on my side of the room, right behind me and Leora. When my mother saw her, something flickered across her face. Not anger. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Leora was relentless. She presented the ledgers, both of them, the original and the copy. She showed emails, recorded phone calls, financial records spanning 35 years. She proved that my mother had embezzled over $12 million from the family business, evaded $4 million in taxes, and destroyed at least 7 people's lives to cover her tracks, including my father's. When the medical fraud came out, the forged dementia diagnosis, the bribed doctors, I watched my mother's lawyer physically slump in his chair. The prosecution called me to the stand. The prosecutor asked me one question. Why did you do this? I looked at my mother. She stared back, her jaw tight, her eyes burning. Because for 63 years, I believed I was useless. I believed I had failed my family. I believed that everything good about me was wrong. My voice cracked. And then I found out the truth. My father was a teacher, just like me. He gave it up because she convinced him it made him weak. And when he started asking questions about her crimes, she destroyed his mind. I looked at the jury. I did this because my mother didn't just steal money. She stole lives. And I was the only one left who could finish the sentence she started. The verdict came 3 days later. Guilty, on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in federal prison, asset forfeiture, restitution, and a permanent ban from holding any corporate position. Varric took a plea deal, 5 years probation and a $500,000 fine. Finian's company collapsed, though he avoided criminal charges by cooperating. But I didn't go to the sentencing. I went to see my mother. One last time. She was smaller now. Orange jumpsuit. Gray hair pulled back. Hands folded on the metal table. Are you happy now? She asked, her voice flat. I sat down across from her and pulled out a letter. Folded. Yellowed with age. Dad wrote this the week before he died. He never sent it. But he wanted you to read it. I slid it across the table. She opened it with shaking hands. I'd read it 100 times. I'd memorized every word. Evelyn, I'm writing this because I'm not brave enough to say it to your face. You made me give up the only thing I ever loved, teaching. You convinced me I was weak for wanting to help people instead of profit from them. And when I finally tried to ask questions, to be a man of integrity, you made me believe I was losing my mind. But I wasn't. You were. And our son, Riven, the one you've spent his whole life crushing, he's the only one of us who turned out like me, and I was too much of a coward to tell him I was proud. She read it twice. Her hands trembled. Tears fell onto the paper. I'm sorry, she whispered. I stood up. I know you are, but sorry doesn't give me back 40 years. I walked toward the door. Riven. I stopped, didn't turn around. You said I was the most useless child you had, and I finished that sentence. But here's the truth, Mom. I looked back at her one last time. I was never useless. You just couldn't see value in anything you couldn't control. And I walked out. 6 months later, I'm back in my classroom. My name was cleared. The school board issued a formal apology. Arya and I meet for coffee every Sunday. She's going back to school, art history. She filed for divorce. She's finally free. Finian reached out last week, asked if we could talk. I'm not ready yet, but maybe someday. And me? I'm teaching. I'm living. I'm finally the man my father hoped I'd be. Not successful by my mother's standards, but successful by mine, because the most useless thing in my life was never me. It was the lie I believed. And now, I'm done believing lies. If this story hit you, if you've ever been told you weren't enough, if you've ever been the invisible one, if you've ever had to burn everything down just to be free, then do me one favor, subscribe, because this is just the beginning. Next week, I'm bringing you the story of a woman who was erased from her family's will, until she found a tape recording that exposed a 40-year conspiracy. You do not want to miss it. Hit that like button if Riven's story gave you chills. Drop a comment telling me, what would you have done? Would you forgive? Would you walk away? Would you burn it all down? Let's talk. This community. We're just getting started. See you in the next story. Now go subscribe.